Hi everybody. This is another video lecture thing, kind of a tutorial. And the thing that I'm going to be talking about today is this thing called version control, okay? And this is not programming itself. This is a thing that we do to support our programming. So what I'm going to do today is mostly just go through and show you what version control does, and we'll understand it through that. So a few things I want to talk about. Going to keep it pretty simple. The first one is just this question of why. So let me talk about that quickly right now. Basically what version control is it's a way to keep track of your work over time. So you might well have had the experience when you're working on some super important file, like maybe an image in Photoshop or an essay that you're working on or something, that you kind of end up saving versions of it over time by giving it different names, right? So, you know, cool anime picture 1, cool anime picture version 2, cool anime picture version 3, cool anime picture version 4. And the reason that you do that is so that if something goes horribly wrong, you've always got older versions of what you were working on to go back to. So version control, which is what we're looking at today, is in part, it's a way of doing that a bit more systematically so that you don't have to keep renaming files and have lots of copies of the same thing. The other reason that it's great is that it kind of gives you this perspective on your project and its entire history. That can be a really useful way to understand your programming and to see the progress that you're making on a project. And then the other reason, which we won't get into as much during this course, but is very important, is that version control software usually makes it a lot easier to work with other people on programming projects, because it means that it makes it much easier not to kind of overwrite each other's work when you're working, which becomes very important. And I should say, because of that particular feature of version control, as well as everything else, version control is something that is completely standard in the professional world of programming. So when you're out there looking for a job, and it's a job that has something to do with coding, most employers are going to expect you to understand version control and how to use it. And so for that reason as well, I've always made it a part of my course. I just think it's worth knowing about for so many different reasons. Not least of all, I really love version control. I use it for all my own work a lot. So that's the why. If you want a really basic why, we have to use it during this course because I say so. Okay. The biggest and most important thing that we need to know about version control for this course and to make it work is that we do all of our work inside that repository folder we created in the previous video. I called it cart253, right? So on my computer, it was in my documents folder. If I can find that on my computer. In my documents folder, in a GitHub subfolder, and then it was here, right? This is it. This cart253 folder here is my repository. On my computer and on your computer, it just looks like any other folder with some files in it. Right now it just has that one Readme file in it that we started out with. But it's a special kind of folder with secret information that's being used to keep track of all of the goings-on inside that folder. So the most important thing is that you need to remember when you're doing work for this course, you should do it all inside this folder, okay? So that would mean, for instance, if you're going to start a project, you would make a new folder, and maybe you would call it Project 1, right? And then you would do all of your Project 1 inside this Project 1 folder, which is in turn inside the cart253 repository folder. It's really essential that you do that. It's important not, for example, to sort of do work outside the repository folder and then copy everything in right at the end. The whole point is to do your work in this folder. I'm hopefully not overemphasizing that too much. Okay, back here. So that's the most important thing. So the why, there's all kinds of reasons. The main thing is make sure that you actually use the folder when you're doing your work, that is, that you store your coursework files inside that folder. The final thing is just, well, how does version control actually work? What does it look like to do version control in the first place? And so what I want to do right now with you, and you should follow along with me, is I want to do some very, very basic examples of the kinds of steps that we take when we're using version control. And this is going to involve editing things on our computer. We'll use Atom for that, to edit the Readme file. It's also going to involve using GitHub Desktop, which you have installed. That's the thing that we actually use to communicate with the repository side of things. And we'll also be looking at github.com to make sure that the files are being synchronized between our computer and that website. Okay, so it's a few things, but we're just going to take a few basic steps and look at what happens. Okay, so the first thing that I want to be doing is I want to edit readme.md, this file here. So many windows opening. I should probably be more professional, but I'm not. So we've got this file called readme.md, and I want to edit it in Atom. Now, I can do that, of course. That is fine. I could just double click on it, for example, and it would be opened in Atom. That would be fine for right now. Generally speaking, once we start doing our actual programming, what we'll usually end up doing is opening the folder containing all of the files that we're working on, right? So in that case, I might just open the cart253 folder in Atom instead. In this instance, though, I'm just going to double-click on readme.md to open it in Atom. Thank God that that worked. Okay, so now we can see in Atom, which just launched and opened the file, if you double-clicked on the file and it opened in some other piece of software, or it didn't open at all, that could happen, right? Because it didn't know how to open a file with the extension .md. You could instead run Atom itself. Like I said, I like to use Command Space on my Mac and then type in the name of the application I want to open. And this is now opening a project that I'm currently working on. Don't worry about that. I could then go in Atom to the File menu up here, and I could go Open, right? And from Open, I could navigate my way to Documents, GitHub, cart253, readme.md, and then Open. And that would work too. Either of those methods is completely fine. I'm going to close this again and reopen just readme.md because currently it's opening it in a giant project, which I don't really want to see. So double click. And now I've just got that file open. So that's always going to be our first step, right? We're always going to open the file or files that we actually want to edit. And I'll talk about this for code specifically in a separate video. And then we want to actually edit the file itself, right? So currently we see the default content, which is that it's got a line that gives the name of the repository, cart253, and then it's got a line that is the description text that I wrote when I was setting up my repository, Pippin's coursework for cart253, exclamation mark. You might notice that this line is red and this line is white. And that's because this document is written using a special markdown language called Markdown, which allows you to kind of set up some little symbols that mean special things in the document. So this hash symbol here at the start of this line means that this is a title of a section. So it would be displayed in fancy big letters and bold, whereas this, without any special symbols, is just displayed as regular text. And in fact, if I go now over to github.com and I go and I'm in my repository, right? github.com/pippinbar/cart253. You can see the contents of that readme.md file, and you can see that the line that had the hash in front of it gets displayed in a special way so that it is like the title or an important section in the document, and then the text below is just displayed as normal text. So Markdown is a whole other story. I'm not going to go into it right now, but it's a wonderful way to format documents in a really, really fast and simple way. Okay, so I'm going to go back to Atom now, and I'm going to edit this. So I don't really like the fact that this is all in lowercase. So I'm going to change this to cart253 creative computation 1. I prefer to have a carriage return there as well. And that's fine. I think that this text is completely fine. And then I'm going to save this document, right? So I've made changes that I want, I've edited, and I'm going to save those changes. So now the document is saved. I then need to go and look to see what is going on in terms of the repository, right? So this view currently doesn't really tell me anything about the status of the repository. I just know that the file is saved. I should say, by the way, that if you're using Atom, you'll notice that when you've got changes that you haven't saved, you get this little blue mark in the tab or the file that you're working on. So it's a blue dot. When I hover over it, it turns into a cross because I can close the tab. A blue dot means that the file is not saved. So I deleted that, and now the file is back to its saved version of itself. Okay, so I've saved my file. I could also have done File and then Save. And I want to now check out the repository because I've made changes to a file in the repository. So I'm going to open GitHub Desktop. Again, Command Space for me on a Mac. I think something similar works on Windows with the Windows button and space, or maybe it's Windows S or something like that. And I'm going to open GitHub Desktop, that thing. And when I open GitHub Desktop, and I check to make sure that in the top left here, the current repository is cart253, my course repository, which it is, I can see that something has happened, right? I can see that GitHub Desktop has noticed that I made some changes to that file just now. We can tell because we can see that the Changes tab here, where my cursor is, for one thing, it's got the number 1 next to it. It's saying that a file has been changed. One file has been changed. And then below it lists all the files which have been changed. It's just this one, readme.md. And with that file selected, over here on the right, I can actually see the changes that were made to this file, right? We can see things in red are things that have been deleted from the file. So I deleted the line that used to say #cart253 all in lowercase. And then in green, we can see all of the lines that have been added to the file. So #cart253 creative computation 1, and then I added that extra carriage return or enter to add a space. That's also been noticed here. So that is, in it, the very basic sense, that is what version control is all about, right? It's about a system of noticing when files change. So if, for example, I were now to go back to Atom, and I were to add another line to this file, I'm so excited about programming. I mean, I actually am so excited about programming. I really like programming quite a lot, so this is not even a lie. So I've made another change. I'm going to save it. This time I'm going File, Save. I'll try to avoid using tons and tons of keyboard shortcuts if I can, just because obviously you can't see them in the video. So I save that. File is saved. If I now go back to GitHub Desktop, on a Mac, by the way, I'm using Command and then the tab to switch between applications. I'll click on GitHub Desktop now. If I go back to that, I can see that, again, this has all been noticed by GitHub Desktop, right? So readme.md has been changed. Those were the changes at the top that we had already seen, but now after the line that says Pippin's coursework for cart253, there's another return, and then there's my new line. I'm so excited about programming. So as soon as we change any file and save it, importantly, we have to save it onto our drive, GitHub Desktop, the repository, notices that change. So that's the first key step, right? It's being noticed. Everything is being noticed. Now, currently, that doesn't mean that this is in our repository, okay? The file itself is saved in that folder, and that's a good and important thing. We always want to save our work. But for us to actually put the file, the changes that we've made in this file into our repository, we have to do this thing called committing. It's not quite as serious as getting married, but it's like a serious step that we add on to our usual workflow of just making changes and saving. Now we make changes, we save, and then we commit those changes to our repository to say, these changes I think are important, they're an important piece of work that I've just completed, and I want to commit them to the repository to say, you know, here is a chunk of work that I just did, okay? So to do that, once we've made and changed this made and saved the changes, and then we've seen that they're reflected in our GitHub desktop. We look down here at the bottom left, and there's a little interface here for making a commit. Now, every time we commit, we need to write a little message that explains what we just did. So you can see there's some default text here for the short message that says update readme.md. That's the default message that it would insert about this commit, about these changes, if we didn't do anything. It's very, very vague, right? It doesn't really tell anything about what actually happened. So always when you commit, you should write a description of what you actually did. There are potential rules that you might run into later in life about how long these messages should be. A lot of people try to keep them quite short. But for this course, just describe what you did. Don't worry about how long it gets. So I'm going to say that I fixed course title, added statement of excitement. Those are the two things that I did in this set of changes, right? That's all of the green stuff I added and the red stuff I removed. So I fixed the title of the course, made it look correct, and I said that I was excited. Those are the two things I did. If I wanted to get really detailed, I could also write a full description down here in the description box. I actually do that with my own projects. When I'm making games, I write a lot of information. Because I treat my games as a kind of research, I need to keep track of all of the ideas that I'm having while I'm programming. For now, though, this is enough. So every time we make changes, we save them, we see that those changes are reflected in GitHub Desktop, we write a commit message just before we commit to master. So this blue button down here is the thing that actually does the commit. And when we click on this button, click, we see that this interface is returned to saying that there aren't any changes. So there's no new changes to our repository that it needs to keep track of, because the repository is now up to date with the files as we change them on the computer. We can tell that it's been added if we go to this history tab next to changes, and we can see that there's two commits in this history. There's the initial commit, which is where the readme.md file was actually created. We can see it was created because there's a plus icon next to it, meaning it's a new file. We can see what the contents of the file were back then when the file was first created, which was this original version here. And then more recently in history, which is what we just did, and you can see it says just now underneath it, whereas the initial commit was 18 hours ago. We can see those changes that we just added, and obviously we can see the message that I just wrote here as well, right? Hopefully, obviously, you should be following along with this as well, right? I think I mentioned that. And again, we can see the changes that were made, etc. So now that we can see this thing in our history, and we can see that there are no new changes to the repository, we know that everything's up to date, right? So now we've made changes to a file by editing and saving it. We have seen that those changes were reflected and seen by GitHub Desktop, and then we've committed those changes to the repository to update the repository to the new version of things. There's one more step that we take. We don't have to do this after every single commit, but I actually usually do. That thing is that we want to push these changes to the origin, the remote repository. That's this button here. The thing is, if we go back over to github.com, right, in my browser, and if I reload this page, you can see that the version that we're seeing on github.com of readme.md is still the old version, right? So when I commit something on my computer, which we just did, it doesn't change the version of the file in the cloud, if you like, the one that's in this repository that lives on github.com. And we want to keep those things synchronized because it makes our life easier. It makes sure that our work is safe on the cloud in case our computer explodes, which could happen. I hope it doesn't happen to anybody listening to this. And it also actually enables us to work on different computers because we could download our repository onto a different computer by cloning it, just like we saw in the other video, and then we could just get to work and keep committing and then uploading things to this remote repository, this github.com repository, to keep everything in sync. So we want to synchronize with the website, and to do that, we go back to GitHub Desktop, and as I said, we do this thing called push. So you can see this push origin button. And you can see there's like a little 1 with an up arrow next to it, right? And that's saying that we've got one commit that we just made that needs to be synchronized with the remote repository. It needs to be uploaded. So I'm going to do that. You can see there's all kinds of places where you can see this option, this push origin here as well. So I'm going to push with this button just because that's what I normally do. I click, it says pushing to origin, it does some uploading stuff, and now it's all done, right? Obviously we can't see any results of that inside GitHub Desktop, but if we go back to the website now, and if I reload this page again, you can see that now this page reflects the new version of the files on our computer because we pushed them, we uploaded them. You can see that it's got the correct title, it's got I'm so excited about programming, and here next to the file, you can always see the most recent message of a commit message that applied to this file, right? So readme.md, the most recent commit message that applies to that file is fixed course title and added statement of excitement. This is a great way that you can start to keep track of what's been going on and which files are being changed for which reasons, right? It's really pretty helpful. Just like in GitHub Desktop, by the way, you can also get a list of all of your commits if you click on this little commits button here in the top right. This will give you the history of all of the commits, just like in GitHub Desktop. So initial commit, and then the commit that said fixed course title, added statement of excitement. Okay, so this stuff is being tracked very, very closely now on our own computer using GitHub Desktop and on the internet on github.com as well. Okay, that's actually it, right? That is the process. If I jump back to text edit for a second, this is the process, right? We make changes. So in this case, we edited readme.md. We write a message and we commit those changes to explain what we did and to add them to the repository on our computer. And then when we want to synchronize them on the internet, we do a push. We upload them to github.com so that they're kind of safe in the cloud. And also so that other people can see them by just going to our repository on the internet. And then we just repeat this process every single time we do some significant piece of work, right? So for instance, let's do this one more time by editing the file. I go back to Atom. Maybe I want to add my homepage. So in Markdown, if I want to add a link, I do square brackets and I can say, check out my homepage. Another exclamation mark because I'm so excited. And then after the square brackets, I can put a URL, https://www.pippinbar.com. That's my web page. That will add a link that will say check out my homepage, and that will link to my website, pippinbar.com. Again, I save that change. I did it with keyboard command then, sorry. I could have gone File and then Save. I recommend learning keyboard commands anyway, they're pretty helpful. I go back to GitHub Desktop. Again, because I've saved a change, it has noticed that change. Readme.md has changed. Therefore, we see what has been added in this instance is check out my homepage. I write a commit message down here in the bottom left, added a link to my homepage. I will refrain from an exclamation mark in my commit message. So that's what I did, right? So that's the description that I give. I commit to master. That adds it to my repository, so now there's no changes. If I want to, I can check the history, and I can see that the most recent thing now is added a link to my homepage. And when I want that to go up onto GitHub, I click on Push Origin, and it gets uploaded. Okay, and then that's done. If I go back to Chrome, and I reload this page one more time, now that readme.md file has been updated again, and we can see the link to my homepage, which is clickable as well. All right, so again, that's the basic cycle then. We make changes. Often that's by editing files. I suppose most often it is. We save those changes, and then we write a commit message and commit to the local repository. That means that the changes and the history of changes are saved on our computer in our repository in that cart253 folder. Then when we want to synchronize with github.com, we do a push I often do that push after every single commit that I do, but you can build up a number of commits and then push at the end of a workday or something like that. It's just really important not to forget to push because you want to keep those things synchronized. And then you just keep going for as long as you're alive. Hopefully you all live to a ripe old age. Okay? That is how version control works. It's about keeping track of the changes that you make to a project over time, and doing so explicitly by keeping track of every little change that gets made, writing messages that explain what those changes are, and also uploading those commits, those changes, to github.com to keep everything safe. The final little thing I just want to review very quickly. If I go over to my Finder, what if I added a file, right? I guess that's what I'm asking myself right now. So currently, this readme.md file was already there, but I could add another file here. To add a file in this instance, I'm just going to duplicate readme.md. So I'm going to right-click on it. I'm going to go down to duplicate down here, and I will give this a different name because that's not a very good name. Readme copy. I'll call it readme 2. That's hilarious. Adding a file like this is a new file that's been added into my repository. That is the same thing as doing an edit or anything, right? So if I go back to GitHub Desktop now, so there's a new file, GitHub Desktop notices that I've got that new file. And again, we can see that little plus icon that's saying that this is a brand new file that's been added to the repository. Because it's just a duplicate of the other README, it's got the exact same content. But I treat the situation in the same way, right? It notices that there's been a change, and that change was a new file. So I could say added readme 2 in my commit message. I could commit that, and then I could push that. I did that quite quickly, right? But I wrote my message, I clicked the blue commit to master, that added it to the local repository, then I clicked the push button up here, that uploaded it to github.com. Okay, so a new file is just another kind of a change. If I go back to github.com and I reload the page, now we can see there are two files in my repository, readme-2 and readme. So pushing uploaded that file to github.com. One thing you might be wondering about is, why is this folder called Project 1, which I created just to talk about keeping stuff organized, why is that not reflected in my repository on github.com, right? It's not showing up. It's pretty confusing, but the reason is that if a folder is empty, i.e. there's no files inside Project 1, it doesn't bother displaying them. So there's no empty folders that will be displayed up here on github.com. They will only appear once there are actual files inside them. That's just a decision that they made on their end. Final thing, just as we can create files, we might end up deleting files as well. So if I were to delete readme-2 on a Mac, I can do move to trash to do that. You could also drag it to the trash. That would be a reasonable thing to do. On Windows, it's the recycle bin. It's probably a better name. So I click move to trash. Now the file is gone. It's no longer in this folder. The same thing would happen if I just dragged the file out onto the desktop or something. If it's not in my cart253 folder, it's no longer in the repository, right? And that is another thing, really the other thing, that will be noticed by GitHub Desktop, right? So in GitHub Desktop, when we go, we see another change, which is that this file, readme-2.md, has been deleted or removed. So there's a little minus sign next to it to say it's been subtracted, and obviously everything inside it has therefore been deleted. I could use their default message here, right? Delete readme-2.md. That would be a reasonable message. I'm going to just write my own thing. Deleted readme-2. That seems like a reasonable message. It's good to get into the habit of writing your own message. So commit to master, push to the origin, and now we're all completely squared away and up to date, right? If we look at our history now, you can see that even though it ended up kind of doing nothing in some sense, right? Like we created a file called readme-2, and that was a commit, and then we deleted it, and that was a commit. So we actually ended up basically in the same situation as we were just after adding the link. But The history of our repository tells us all of the stuff that we do. It keeps track of everything, not just maybe the things that you think are relevant, but every change that gets made. Okay? So that's important to know. The rationale behind this is that it's useful to know what was added and deleted just as much as anything else. It's about keeping track of everything. Okay. So that's kind of it. That's what I wanted to talk about for this the video. The why, it's great to keep track of your work. It's a way that you'll be able to undo things. I'll talk about undoing things in a separate video when it becomes a little bit more relevant. And this is version control, which we've just learned is the standard way that programmers work in the real world. It's a very, very good thing to know about. Like I said, the key thing that you have to know in terms of doing your work is that you should always be working inside your repository folder. The cart253 folder. That's where all of your files should be. And then as we saw, there's a basic process, which is that you make some change. That is, you edit a file and save it, or maybe you add a file or delete a file. You then write a message and commit that to your local repository so that it knows about the changes and has them as part of its history. And then to synchronize those changes with github.com to keep things safe in the cloud, if you like, you push those changes and that uploads them. And you just always do that every single time you do a significant unit of work. Okay? And I'll talk more about what a significant unit of work might look like later. The short answer is you can't commit too often, really. You should just use it regularly. Okay? That's all that I've got to talk about for this little section. Let me look you in the eye. That's it. Practice this and try and get as comfortable as you can with this idea of changing things, committing them, and pushing them. It's a process that will serve you really well in this course, in other courses, and then in your professional life as well. So it's a wonderful skill to pick up and get comfortable with. Like I say, if you're not feeling comfortable with it immediately and it seems weird to you, just keep practicing. And it will, over time, become something that just seems totally normal. I can promise you that. Okay, so I'll see you around. Bye.